Hi friends, welcome to the War Heroes channel. Today, we will talk about the memoirs of Friedrich Paulus Adjutant Wilhelm Adam. He fought with Paulus until he was captured in 1943. Let's try together to understand the reasons for the defeat of Paulus' army in Stalingrad. By evening, we had brought at least some order to the confusion. About 7 p.m., we were called to supper, which we took in Paulus's bunker. At first, I had to talk about what was happening outside. Then events in the cauldron were discussed. With this opportunity, I discovered that only in recent days, after its formation by the release of senior officers, had Army Group Don obtained a true picture of the situation in the cauldron. At the end of November, its Chief of Staff, Major General Schultz, and shortly afterwards its EA, Colonel Bussey, had flown in for a few hours. Since then, contact was generally being maintained by radio. General Paulus had no possibility of speaking personally to Field Marshal von Manstein. Nevertheless, the mood in our group that evening was quite high. Halt's army had started opening up the cauldron and by evening had come forward a considerable distance. If the army keeps up this pace, contact will have been made at the latest in a week, said one of the junior orderly officers. Paulus damped down this optimism a bit. If the 4th Panzer Army maintains its pace, good. That you make this limitation, it must be obvious to you, Zimmerman, that Halt has been thrown back by the Red Army's most forward forces. The combined thrust with the main forces has yet to come. Let us hope that Halt's army has sufficient breakthrough power. I recall the conversation I had had in Morozovsk the day before with Colonel Wenck, the German staff officer to the Romanian Third Army. If I am not wrong, I commented now, the 14th Panzer Corps with the 6th and 25th Panzer Divisions, as well as the 15th Luftwaffe Field Division, formed the spearhead of Halt's army. Romanian infantry and cavalry divisions follow as flank protection. Apart from the 6th Panzer Division, which has just come replenished from France, all the divisions no longer boast their complete fighting strength. This applies especially to the Romanian divisions, which were scattered by the Red Army attack on the 20th November and put to flight. That's right, agreed Schmidt. But in the next few days, Halt will get the 17th Panzer Division. Paulus looked pensively in front of him. When the orderly officers left the room and only the department chiefs remained, he said, "I don't understand the Army High Command anymore. It seems that nothing has been learnt from the heavy blows of the last weeks." The composition of the Halt army is a shattering example that the strength of the Red Army is irresponsibly underestimated. Adam tells me that the few advancing divisions are hardly sufficient to close the new gaps appearing daily on the Chur front. I am of the opinion, General, I added, that our troops on the lower Chur cannot hold their position. Until now, the Russians have felt their way forward with security forces. We could only repel them with the utmost effort. With the main enemy attack, the Chur front will soon collapse. This threatens the Halt army's flank. It no longer has a chance of retreating. Paulus nodded. Let us trust, gentlemen, that the Army High Command will bring forward reinforcements in time. Then he turned to me. The Army High Command has already ordered Army Group Don to take up positions for a relief attack. Elchlepp will inform you of the details. With these words, Paulus stood up. We parted from him. I accompanied the Aya to his dugout only a few steps away. As we stepped out into the cold winter night, Elchlepp said skeptically, "Quite honestly, I too have only the slightest confidence in Halt's mission." "But you were here from the beginning, Elchlepp, in immediate proximity to the troops. I can still not understand why the army did not set off immediately to the southwest. That was certainly possible in the first 2 or 3 days." "Yes, we wanted to, but we had not experienced these nerve-wracking days. Day after day, we asked permission by radio to break out. Army Group B supported our requests. Hitler and the Army High Command turned them down. Finally, the Army Group confirmed the Army High Command's orders. It was the most obvious tug of war between the Army and the superior commands. As the weaker ones gave in, we were overwhelmed. The Army High Command presumed that it could assess the situation in the cauldron better than the 6th Army, which was sitting in the mess. Hitler had fixed the course of the western and southern fronts precisely. No ditch, no village, no piece of soil of the ordered ground was to be given up without his permission. We are now just better paid non-commissioned officers. In his office, the colonel showed me a file. "Here, read it." It was Paulus's selected position for the army. I read something like the following. The 4th Panzer Army does not appear to be strong enough to be able to break out of the Stalingrad ring. Should it not, however, attain its goal, the chances of a breakout are worsened. Already on supply grounds, the 6th Army is unable to maintain resistance much longer. At the moment, it is not possible to see how and when the Don front broken through by the enemy can be stabilized. Even should the thrust of the 4th Panzer Army succeed, Hoth's troops are threatened by the danger of being cut off. From this assessment of the situation, the 6th Army headquarters proposes a breakout from the cauldron to the southwest, in timely accord with the 4th Panzer Army's attack to the northeast, with which it will combine on the high ground southwest of Stalingrad. Strength-wise, the 6th Army is capable of taking all the wounded with it. In this way, the fighting strength of the 6th Army will be maintained. The High Command will thus have reserves for the construction of a new front in its hands. In my estimation, this was a fundamentally correct and realistic assessment of the situation. I spoke to Elchlev, expressing the following thoughts. Whether point 3 can be realized today, I would doubt. This question is certainly difficult to decide, he replied. With our proposal, we want above all once more to achieve an exact check of all planned measures. I simply cannot believe that the High Command can play so casually with an army of 22 divisions. Nevertheless, I am impressed that Hoth's army was not reinforced by a single battalion, and we here have to keep on holding out. As a soldier, I will always obey the orders of my superiors, but I want to be able to understand them. That has become somewhat difficult recently. I had the greatest confidence in Manstein, but isn't it laughable when the field marshal in this desperate situation comes out stereotyped with the announcement that the Führer has ordered so and so? Should he not be more in tune with our army headquarters? Now read this too. He handed me several radio messages from Führer headquarters. From the date stamps, it could be seen that they had arrived immediately after the formation of the cauldron. Hardly believable was what was there. The 6th Army from then on was to call itself Fortress Stalingrad. Elchlev saw my startled face. That astonishes you, does it? But now at least you know where you are, in Fortress Stalingrad. If I had not read it myself, I would have doubted you. You would be pulling my leg. Stalingrad a fortress. What does Paulus say then, and Schmidt and the other generals about this nonsense? The same as you, it's nonsense. The description fortress does not only apply to the city itself. Even here, a comprehensive system is lacking. No bomb-proof dugouts nor constructions with tank turrets. No underground communication passages nor barricades and obstacles are available. The ruins of the buildings and cellars offer some protection against splinters, perhaps even from the weather, but one cannot speak of preparation for a long period of time. But you know that from your own experience. And how does it look on the new western and southern fronts, Elchlev? That is where the description fortress sounds exactly like a joke. There are neither trenches nor dugouts, only holes in the hard-frozen, queued-up ground. Just holes in the snow. There are soldiers fighting in resting places, offering them a little protection from the cutting steppe wind, but nothing more. A strong attack by the Russians and our hungry, half-frozen and overtired soldiers would be unable to hold. These all, closed the eye, are things that I can only describe with difficulty. But in the end, we are soldiers and we know what orders are. It had become late. I reached out my hand to shake his. Outside, the icy northeast wind blew in my face and through my uniform. Shells were exploding in the distance. The sound of vehicles came from the Potomac, Stalingrad Road. In the air throbbed some Junkers 52s or Heinkel 111s, which unfortunately were bringing us only a fraction of the things we needed to live and fight. Uneasily, I churned in my first night in the cauldron, the night of the 14th December, tossing to and fro on my straw sack. I got up while it was still dark. The orderlies had already prepared the sparse breakfast. There was a slice of bread more than usual from some loaves that I had brought from Morozov's. I sat at the table with General Paulus. Each of us had a cup of hot black coffee in front of us. Slowly we chewed the 3 slices of bread allotted to us. Paulus' eyes were directed at the situation map on the wall. The front at the big breakthrough position west of the Don was shown as I had indicated. From Kotelnikovsky, thick blue arrows pointed north. Had we any news about Operation Hoth, General? I asked. As Schmidt informed me by telephone earlier, the attack is going according to plan. Since yesterday, we have had verbal communication with Army Group Don through the decimeter apparatus, so we can actually be informed earlier than before. For the time being, I am not very confident. Their report yesterday on the situation outside the cauldron was more serious than I thought. Look at the map. The Italian 8th Army is threatened in the flank and rear. They are almost just battle groups that should be securing the wide breakthrough points. If the enemy attacks here again, the catastrophe will be even greater than it is now. I simply cannot understand, General, how we can stabilize the front. Have we still no troops to form a new army? Won't all the Army High Command's measures come too late? Will the Italians hold their sector of the front on the Don? Should the Italian 8th Army be thrown back, then the Hungarians will also be forced to give up their positions. Then even the German 2nd Army on the Voronezh front sector will be threatened on its flank. It is presumed that it is possible to stabilize the whole Cherdon front, and that the Army High Command has operational and strategic reserves and has already sent them marching to the threatened places. I cannot be certain about this with you. After the bad experiences of the last 3 weeks, I have become somewhat skeptical about the decisive and resolute capability of the Army High Command. Only a question, if you will permit, General. Elchlet showed me a radio message from Hitler ordering that Halt should re-establish the old front. That would mean we would have to remain here. With the current uncertain situation outside the cauldron, in my opinion, such an order would be nonsense. The order really reads like that. Nevertheless, we have made preparations to enable Halt to make a counterthrust. I hope that the Army High Command recognizes, at least at the last minute, that my proposed abandonment of the city and breakthrough to the southwest is the only possible way of saving the army. I was not making much progress in my efforts to keep a realistic picture of the fighting strength of our divisions and units. Therefore, I decided to visit some of the court adjutants to speak to them about how we could more precisely establish the strengths of their many elements. I began with the nearby headquarters. The court lay mainly in the city. It had, apart from the defeat of the 94th Infantry Division, suffered least from the beginning of the enemy offensive. The city had become the quietest fighting front of the cauldron. How was the atmosphere among the staff? I asked the adjutant. Not good, he replied. The older ones complain like mad. It is annoying that Paulus looks inactive while the 6th Army slowly but surely goes to earth. Seydlitz regards it as an irresponsible waffle by agreeing that 22 divisions could be supplied by air. He must know about Demyansk. Would you like to read his memorandum, or do you know it already? I have heard about the memorandum at our headquarters. It interests me very much indeed. Have you the text there? But of course, Colonel. The adjutant went to this file chest, took a folder out and handed it to me. I read it ever more intently, precisely, matter-of-factly, irrefutably. Seydlitz assessed our catastrophic supply situation, the continuing enemy offensive, the first effective relief measures taken by the Army High Command, and the strength situation of the troops. All these hard facts demanded a decision. Either the 6th Army defends itself in a hedgehog position until it fades away. That means it is defenseless, or the army breaks out of the encirclement in active engagement, concluded the general. He was not afraid of taking the requisite measures against Hitler's orders to hold out, and ended his memorandum with the words, "If the Army High Command does not immediately lift the order to persevere in the hedgehog position, arising from their own knowledge about the army and the German people and the obligations of command, they themselves, despite the orders that until now have prevented freedom of maneuver, should make use of the still available possibility of avoiding catastrophe by means of their own attack. The complete destruction of 200,000 combatants and all of their equipment stands in the balance. There is no other option." That was civil courage, daring, and decisiveness for independent handling, as I then felt. That Seydlitz's goal was also none other than the army being saved for the continuation of the war, thus for new battles and dying did not occur to me. Of course, Adam, Paulus recognized this in the very first days of the encirclement. Major General Pickert, commanding the 9th Flak Division, regarded it as illusory that the Luftwaffe could keep our army sufficiently supplied. That is why the commander-in-chief let him fly to the army group on the 27th November to speak to Field Marshal von Manstein, without holding anything back, and to orientate him on the maximum possibilities of air supply with the Luftwaffe units available. Pickert was to openly explain and stress our doubts about the reality of air supply, and reiterate that the Army could only be saved by breaking out with support from outside. Therefore, no time could be lost. A question, Elchlet: how many machines must fly into the cauldron every day if the Army is to remain battle-worthy? You know, Adam, that we need at least 700 tons of supplies, and a Ju-52 takes 2 tons. So that means that every day 350 Ju-52s must land at Potomac. A He-111 can only carry only 1.5 tons. The number of machines thus rises to more than 400 should there not be enough Ju-52s available. Colonel Botter gave me a similar answer. And how many machines have actually flown in the last days? Only a small number, a quarter at the most. But let me go on. Pickert returned several days later. He reported to Paulus about his long talk with General Fiebig, the commanding general of the VI 8th Air Corps, whom Hitler had tasked with the air supply of the 6th Army. Although this corps on Hitler's orders was spared from all combat tasks, Fiebig had to declare that he had too few machines to be able to fly the requested tonnage into the cauldron. He was himself in a conflict. He flew into the cauldron on the 11th December and declared before Paulus and Schmidt that he would do everything humanly possible to assist the badly suffering 6th Army. But he was not only lacking aircraft. Sometimes heavy frosts, raging snowstorms, and thick fog paralyzed air traffic almost completely. As a result of this, on not a single day so far has he been able to deliver more than a quarter of the required tonnage. Within the next few days, we will apparently be forced to further reduce the bread ration, which was already reduced to 200 grams a day at the end of November. I have already experienced in Morozovsk several divisions in fleeing retreat losing their whole stores, even their field kitchens, and having to go hungry for several days. That is how it is. Therefore, soon after his arrival in the cauldron, Paulus ordered all units to report the precise state of their rations, clothing, ammunition, and fuel stocks. Quartermasters and managers were ordered to ensure even distribution. I do not know if all have reported back honorably and truthfully. We cannot check all the reports. We must thus assume that most of the encircled army troops have been hungry for days. The lack of supplies worsens every 24 hours in direct correlation to the smaller number of machines flying in. Where is the way out, Elchlet? The way out lies in continuous maximum possible air supply and in the success of Operation Hoth. Neither of us believes in the reality of the air bridge. Whether Hoth's army will succeed in forming a land bridge to us appears to me also as very uncertain. But are we not falling into an unhealthy self-deception? Naturally, a big question mark lies behind both assumptions, but we too are not idle. Although Hitler has ordered Stalingrad to be held, we have made all preparations to be able to thrust towards the Hoth army in the next few days. We cannot give up faith in success. This General Staff officer, Colonel Elchlet, was a 1 in 10,000 honorably believing officers and soldiers. Their loyalty rested in their trust in the High Command, for which they were ready to risk their lives, and they were also firmly convinced that their trust with deeds and decisions was in accordance with their responsibility. Trust for responsibility, responsibility for trust. That certainly was the formula to which military thinking and dealing conformed. Brought up in this spirit, most of us lived and fought by this principle. What, however, if the High Command misused this trust, so that this responsibility on whatever grounds, perhaps even carelessly, was illegal? This doubt nagged at me, this obvious belief, this unshakable trust in the responsibility of the Wehrmacht command was strongly embedded in me. The formal trust regarding responsibility versus trust, seemed questionable to me, simplified, somewhat naive after the bitter disillusionments of the last weeks. Might not General von Seydlitz be right? For the moment I went on with other everyday matters. I have yet another question, Elchlet. Can we look after the wounded and sick, especially the badly injured, in orderly fashion? Unfortunately not. You know that all the big hospitals lie west of the Don. There are a few field hospitals on the edge of the city and in the steppe. These have long since been overflowing, although we pack every returning aircraft with badly wounded. It's not only places that are lacking, but especially dressings, narcotics, medicines, surgical equipment. The supply is minimal. Doctors and medical staff are vastly overworked and are falling out in growing numbers. Army doctors and quartermasters can tell you all about that. The conversation with the ayah had made me wiser, but not more comfortable. I made my way to my office in the commander-in-chief's dugout. Only a few courier post items were there. While I was giving Senior Surgeon Major Cupper instructions to deal with, the door opened and Paulus entered. "Much work, Adam." "Nothing worth mentioning, General. Some recommendations for the Knight's Cross and the German Cross in Gold have been approved. I will pass them straight on to the Corps." A Knight's Cross for a lost battle? Comical, don't you think? Paulus smiled and then went on. "You were at the Corps headquarters this morning. Is there anything new there?" "No, General. Or actually, yes, there was something new for me. The court adjutant told me that some of the divisions on the northern and eastern fronts of the Cauldron are backing General Seydlitz. I did not know that." Paulus nodded his head lightly and spoke in a somewhat lower voice. "Yes, that is how Hitler's radio message went. You can read it later at my office. I myself do not know what it means. It could be that Hitler is testing whether Seydlitz really has the courage to go against a Führer order. It could also be that Seydlitz stands high in Hitler's estimation. I don't understand it, General. On one side, Hitler says he is leaving things to the commander-in-chief of the Sixth Army. A day later, he places most of the divisions under General Seydlitz. But that is a contradiction, especially as Seydlitz has requested freedom of action despite the Führer order. What does he really mean now at this point? I asked him about it in the presence of General Strecker. He answered me with, "Under the circumstances, I must naturally obey. Come with me. I will show you Hitler's radio message." In his office, Paulus took a sheet of paper from his briefcase and handed it to me. I read the following sentences signed below by Hitler. "Breakout out of the question. Supply by air assured. New army is being assembled under General Holt for opening up the Cauldron. All divisions on the Volga and Northern Front come under the command of General Seydlitz." A supplement noted that General Paulus retained responsibility for the general command of the surrounded troops. Later, when I was alone again, I had time to think about the Paulus-Seydlitz relationship. Two opposing characters, Paulus, the knowledgeable, careful general staff officer, the thinker, but also the hesitant one. Seydlitz, much less well-trained and knowledgeable than Paulus, but nevertheless a decisive daredevil. Seydlitz, and also having his own opinion regarding Paulus's frank presentation, was defiant in contrast to the other generals. Hitler's order with the personal distinction of giving him higher powers of command had also turned him silent. General von Seydlitz too obeyed, despite his divergence of opinion. How often, as the army adjutant, had I been able to observe how higher positions, promotions, and higher decorations at least influenced the behavior of several officers. How they were linked through thinking and dealing in selected ways. Even Seydlitz had given up. The days after the 12th December were especially exciting. Army headquarters prepared the breakout. Operation Hoth had the code word Winter Storm. With thunderclap, the 6th Army would break out of the ring and march towards Hoth. It was planned that we would take out all the wounded on trucks. If only the food supplies were better. Of food supplies, fuel, and ammunition up to the 12th December per day on average, not once was 100 tons flown in. In response to the incessant call for help from the army, there was a slight increase thereafter. But even then, the minimum request of 300 tons was not attained by far. Hunger increased and bored even deeper into the bowels of the surrounded. The number of those debilitated through hunger already exceeded the number of wounded. In every bunker, in every trench, at every main dressing station lay wasted soldiers and officers, no longer able to stand on their feet. In this emergency situation, the army took back the horses of the Romanian cavalry division that were already half dead from lack of fodder. The army quartermaster, Captain Tupke, gave 4,000 horses up for slaughter. Their flesh and bones enabled the rations to be improved at least temporarily. Not much was gained, however, as on the 15th December the bread ration had to be reduced to 100 grams. 2 slices of bread per day, a thin soup of horse flesh, and some cups of herb tea or malt tea was what the soldier had to fight and live on, and withstand frost, snow, and storm. Understandably, the 250,000 encircled men fervently awaited Hoth's approaching army. With the arrival of the 4th Panzer Army, a wave of relief, returning self-confidence, and a new will to resist swept through the cauldron. Holding on seemed to make sense once more. A few days more and the deadly surrounding ring could be prized open. The high morale lasted 2 or 3 days, but then, as day after day stretched into futile waiting, shattering disappointment and bitter resignation took over. General Paulus drove every morning to the division standing at the critical point of the battle. Early in the morning of the 16th December, the thermometer was below -30 degrees as he set out for the hard-threatened western front of the cauldron. When he returned towards midday, he looked as if he had experienced something serious. "You were at the 44th Infantry Division today, General. According to yesterday's evening report, they have had large losses. Have the Russians attacked again? You know that there is constant simmering in this sector, but the casualties from combat are not the worst. The divisional commander and divisional doctor report ever more cases of severe freezing in recent days. Without adequate winter clothing, the soldiers in their holes in the snow are unprotected from the ice-cold steppe winds. By day, they cannot leave their trenches and holes to perform their necessary functions at all. When they try to, most of them have to pay with their lives. There is none that can rest in their narrow holes. Inevitably, they freeze. How can the wounded and sick be removed from the front lines? That is just about an insoluble problem. The enemy fires at any movement. Only with the arrival of darkness can the wounded be carried off and the frozen treated. That means too often that the medical assistance comes too late. Then the Deputy Senior Quartermaster, Lieutenant Colonel von Konowski, reported Captain Tuck is in Karpalka as ordered. He has assembled their trucks with a load capacity of 700 tons, with which he will follow our attacking tanks. His task is to take over the supplies from the Hoth Army and to drive as quickly as possible to our advancing divisions. The 8th Air Corps has orders to drop fuel and ammunition to the tanks thrusting south. Guns and field kitchens will be towed by the trucks. The necessary number is ready. Schmidt now remarked that all superfluous apparatus should be prepared for destruction. Paulus was looking at the map during this report. Now he turned around to us. Hopefully the order will come very soon, or there will be the danger of us not being able to carry it out anymore. Every day gnaws at the strength of our soldiers, reduces our food supplies, ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. Today, there is still sufficient fuel for a 30-kilometer attack, but in 4 or 5 days our reserves will have shrunk to the extent that we will no longer be capable of carrying out an attack. After this most serious, although not so surprising, appraisal of the situation, we were dismissed. Naturally, the measures taken by the troops in the Karpalka area could not remain concealed. The simple soldier in these respects was especially alert. Just as the slowness of the advance of the Hoth Army brought a certain depression, so the news of an impending breakout spread with the speed of the wind, bringing new optimism. The simple soldiers just wanted to forget the stresses and victims of the past weeks if they got out of this mousetrap. Breaking out of the cauldron meant regular and sufficient supplies, release from the fighting front, rest, and long overdue leave, seeing wives and children, parents and relations. What illusions these overexcited, fought-out, emaciated soldiers had. Our clerks and orderlies beamed in expectation of the forthcoming change of luck. They no longer sat apathetic and indifferent at their desks. When towards evening on the 16th December, I went to see my clerks in their dugout, I found Senior Sergeant Major Kepper smiling. "It will soon be over, Colonel. How we will celebrate when we get out of this damn hole again. Those at home don't know anything about how it is with us. Only yesterday I had a letter from my wife in which she asked for at least the 10th time when I was coming on leave. You lucky chap. I, dear Kepper, have heard nothing from my family since the 19th November. But one can only hope. Prepare for me all the paper rubbish that you have collected for destruction. We will not encumber ourselves with it in our breakout." "Already done, Colonel. Just now there was a clerk from the Corps here. According to what he said, General von Seydlitz is setting a good example. He has literally burned everything: uniforms, underwear, boots, camera, books, and retained only those things that he can carry on himself." I had to laugh. That was Seydlitz, temperamental and basic, and no friend of half measures. These days our staff have returned to their old life. The apparatus ran full pelt. Orderly officers, telephone conversations, radio communications, orders, and reports. Schmidt especially was on form. Almost daily, Paulus spoke over the decimeter apparatus with Field Marshal von Manstein. I listened in to most of these conversations and took notes. They didn't agree with each other. Paulus wanted to know, what is the situation at the Soviet breakthrough point west of the Don? When can we expect the relief army to get near? Is there a comprehensive stable front at the Chur? Has the enemy offensive been checked? Will General Halleck counterattack soon? But Manstein gave only inadequate, vague answers. Paulus was angered by what he saw as the lack of orientation of the commander-in-chief of Army Group Don. How can I make decisions here when I don't know what it looks like outside, what Manstein and the Army High Command are doing and intending? I only hear the eternal hold on, which we have been doing for 4 weeks already and going to the dogs. Certainly it seems that Hoth is making hardly any progress. Parts of his 14th Panzer Corps have gone over to the defensive. Perhaps we can relieve Hoth when we break out and thrust towards him, General. The Russians would then have to fight on 2 sides and divide their forces. That is quite right, Adam. But until now, Manstein has not allowed it. The code word thunderclap has to be given. Until now, he has not thought about it. Hitler and the Army High Command still want us to hold the city. And Manstein is shy of giving such an order, even though he knows our predicament. At the time right after the closing of the Cauldron, the order to hold on was based, among other things, on the contention that an early abandonment of the city would result in the destruction of Army Group A in the Caucasus, which at any time could have become impassable because of the autumn rains and mud, as it certainly is today, also in the foothills of the Caucasus where the ground is frozen hard. Nevertheless, the ban on a breakout for us still continues. What can I do when I don't know the full situation and am not being properly informed by Manstein? These last words rang like a desperate cry for help. Paulus seemed to be about to fall apart under the overwhelming burden of responsibility. Hopefully he would keep it together, I thought, as I left the room. Late in the evening on the 17th December, Army Group Don informed us that it had made contact with Hoth's army and had crossed the Axe near Generalowski. Hopefully Hoth will now gain some ground, General, I said when I went to tell him. It would be wishing a lot in our interest. Had this division gone into the attack 5 days earlier, success in my opinion would have been assured. Meanwhile, the Red Army High Command has had sufficient time to reinforce its defensive forces. Let us wait and see what happens tomorrow and the day after. How this waiting tore at the nerves, how it paralyzed. Even the agile Major, General Schmidt, showed signs of it. When I suggested pulling out soldiers and officers from the staff and rear services as infantry, he agreed but wanted to wait until the decision on our breakout had succeeded. Was the enemy also hesitating? It was hardly detectable. He was active, if only in the form of a sewing machine which circled over our headquarters and dropped bombs. One of them apparently struck quite close to our headquarters dugout. The ground shook and windows shattered. How long would the enemy hold back his clenched fist? When and how would our waiting end? On the morning of the 18th December, the airport commandant rang from Potomac. Major Eisman has just landed. He is asking for a vehicle to pick him up. Immediately, a car from the standby pool was sent off. 1 hour later, the major reported to General Paulus and then to Major General Schmidt. Thereafter followed a detailed discussion in Schmidt's office involving both generals and the representative of the Army Group. I got to know Eisman during our lunch together. My first impression was that he was still a very young officer, though clever and adroit. What task had brought him here? No word was spoken about it during the meal. I only heard that he had orders to fly back to the headquarters of Army Group Don at Novokirksk that same day. A flying visit, I thought. After the meal, Eisman wanted to talk with Elchlev and Konowski. As usual, I escorted Paulus to his bunker. The commander-in-chief took me into his office. Go ahead and ask what the short visit by the young general staff officer was about, Adam. Manstein had tasked him with briefing us on the overall situation. The Hoth army has come up against a very strong, overwhelming enemy. It is making hardly any progress. In the opinion of Army Group Don, it is questionable whether Hoth can break through the encircling ring with the forces available to him. Manstein also considers an increase in air supply as out of the question. Therefore, the 6th Army should prepare itself for a counterattack. I think, General, that we have made all the preparations necessary for it. When should we start? The most serious thing seems to me to be our fuel situation. Our fuel tanks can only go just 30 kilometers with the supplies available. Hot spearheads are, however, more than 50 kilometers away from us. Has the Army group at least arranged for fuel and ammunition to be flown in? Does Manstein know the fighting condition of our soldiers? Does he know that most are half-starving? You say to yourself that our soldiers have been weakened in most of our divisions to stand about 40 kilometers from the proposed breakthrough points. Think of the fate of the 94th Infantry Division that Seydlitz withdrew from the Northern Front on the 23rd November. Exactly so will the enemy drive into our emaciated, decimated troops and defeat them. No, under the present circumstances, giving the order to break out would be irresponsible. I must be certain that the outside encirclement will be broken or that Hoth is so close that we can meet up in one day. If anyone can make the preparations for the breakout possible, it is Manstein. Until now, he has kept avoiding this decisive question. I have explained my position openly to Eastman and asked him to brief Manstein just as openly. The situation in the cauldron has basically changed in the last weeks. Our army is now very limited in its fighting capacity. I don't understand, given our catastrophic situation, why Manstein only sent a major instead of flying into the cauldron himself or at least sending his chief of staff. Our superiors general need to avoid a further worsening of the situation. You are absolutely right. Army Group Headquarters must know what has to be done. Manstein knows the situation within and outside the cauldron. He knows what forces are still coming. Apparently, the commander-in-chief of Army Group Don is not ready to go against Hitler of his own accord. I have spoken much about the cauldron in my personal talks with Manstein. Now he must lay his cards on the table. Schmidt too cannot understand Manstein handling the 6th Army on the brink this way, sending us his youngest staff officer. Now we have to wait yet again. Konowski gave Eisman a written report on the overwhelming lack of food supplies and medical equipment. It must be clear to Manstein that the remains of the 6th Army will go miserably to the ground, if not now, then at the last minute. All the forces from outside are concentrated on its relief. For 10,000 even this massive assistance operation is coming too late. Despite everything, I have little hope that Manstein will issue the order to give up Stalingrad. You will see, Adam, that whatever happens here, I will be the one made responsible for it. Who will take into consideration that my hands were tied to their orders by superior headquarters? Who will notice that I was hampered by lack of information about the situation outside the cauldron? What could I say to our almost baffled general, who day and night pondered how he could lead the army out of this hopeless situation? I could find no words. It was obvious to me that no one would take the main responsibility for the suffering of the 6th Army, except those who had sent him with his soldiers into this abyss and then betrayed him. But who were these people? Hitler, Keitel, Joll, and the Army High Command? What blame is attached to Weeks or Manstein? Were there more guilty ones? I could find no clear answer at that time. On the evening of the 18th December, the departmental heads met in Paulus' bunker as usual. Schmidt's short report about Operation Hoth stated only what Eisman had said that morning. The 17th and the 6th Panzer Divisions were practically stuck fast. Finally, we shared our meager supper. The atmosphere was depressed. Then an orderly entered and asked Paulus to go to the telephone for Field Marshal von Manstein. We listened attentively. Was this the saving order arriving? Elchlep said, "That worked really quickly this time." Nobody took his eyes off the door. Minutes passed, but Paulus did not come. Slowly, the old skepticism returned. If the conversation was really about the breakout, Paulus would certainly have called Schmidt. Then finally, the commander-in-chief came back into the room. That was certainly unusual. It could have nothing to do with the order for the breakout. While I was still reflecting, Paulus came up to my chair. "I have for you all, gentlemen, a happy announcement to make. Today, our first adjutant, Colonel Adam, for his participation in the construction and defense of the Chur Front, his personal engagement in this, and his bravery, has been awarded the Knight's Cross." With these words, Paulus handed me the high decoration that Kepper had brought. I was so astonished that I remained dumb at his congratulations. All rushed towards me and shook my hand. For a brief moment, misery and death were forgotten. A great pleasure overwhelmed me, sincere pride in this decoration, especially since the commander-in-chief emphasized that it was the first time in the German history of war that an army adjutant had been decorated with the highest award. But this happy feeling vanished before it could really spread. Into the celebration cup fell the bitter remembrance of the heavy casualties on the lower tier, of the many comrades who had then and since lost their lives. At the end of November, the commander-in-chief of the army group had ordered us to keep the line of retreat open for the Sixth Army. It was for this reason that the soldiers who had fled to Nishincherskaya were deployed. Helping their sorely pressed comrades in the cauldron was also my duty then. That was why we had prepared for the fiercest action. But the fact that the lives of the bloody victims had been thrown away did not change my Knight's Cross that had come after it. More than the sad review of the previous 4 weeks, the horrible present prevented this order from going to my head. We staff officers were still sitting together when Schmidt brought some fresh news on the evening of the 18th December. The Soviet army was pursuing the attack begun on the 16th December with growing success. The whole of the Italian Eighth Army's front had been breached. Its units were in wild flight, their positions abandoned as they set off for the west. Thus, the Chief of Staff concluded his briefing. On the left flank of the upper tier, fighting German units and emergency units are being torn wide apart. The breach is already 45 kilometers wide. Apparently, Army Group has had to withdraw the whole of the left wing. What would happen to Holt's offensive now? Would his Panzer Army be strong enough to launch an attack and quickly make contact with us? Kilometers, we stood together with Paulus and Schmidt in front of the situation map. It was incomprehensible. We knew little about which of our own troops were at the breakthrough points, what their fighting strength was, exactly how their positions ran. We knew absolutely nothing about the strength of the enemy and his main direction of thrust. The commander-in-chief listened for a few minutes to our conjectures and then said, "Everything depends on what reserves the Army High Command can and will deploy. We cannot judge this from inside the cauldron. May the optimists be right." Worries upon worries. I went out into the clear frosty night with the eye, and we walked together between our bunkers several times. It is all incomprehensible to me, Elchlet. If I am not wrong, was the German 29th Corps not deployed with the Italian 8th Army? It seems as if the German units have disengaged too. Apparently they have been scattered by the fleeing Italians. When I consider, Elchlet, how we have rushed from victory to victory since 1940, now defeat follows defeat, there must be a reason for it. I see the main reason being our immovable, stubborn command. We react too seldom and then only reluctantly to the enemy's measures, underestimating him in unanswerable ways. The more I think about it, the more oppressed I am with the thought that we too in the headquarters of the Sixth Army have handled things inflexibly and narrow-mindedly in decisive moments. That is naturally easy to say today, looking back. Neither Paulus nor Schmidt, nor the commanding generals, with the exception of Seydlitz, nor you or I in the days before the 20th November were prepared to go against the orders of Hitler and the Army High Command to break through to the southwest and unclasp ourselves from the threatening enclosure. There was still enough time then. We would have saved thousands of lives that have since been lost in a battle that on our side lacked ammunition, fuel, and rations, which must be described less as a battle than as an agony. Will not all of us who occupy leading appointments in the Sixth Army be allocated a portion of the blame at some time? You know my standpoint in this situation, Adam. We are soldiers and we have to obey. That also applies even if we cannot understand the correctness of an order and perhaps ourselves have to bite the dust. Every soldier has to take this into account, but professional officers like you and me especially so. Not every day is evening now. The leaf can still turn in our favor. We have known each other long enough, I said, to know that neither of us is a coward. If it falls to our lot, we must reckon on having to go to the front any minute. I agree with you completely that it goes with our profession. The colonel followed me down the 5 steps to the entrance to my bunker. I opened the door. In front of the stove, my lieutenant was squatting and stoking the fire. In contrast to conditions outside, the room was pleasantly warm. The walls seemed to have defrosted. While Elchlet was exchanging a few words with my lieutenant, I extracted the bottle of Martell brandy from my box and uncorked it. I found the glass for Elchlet and Wehrmacht issue aluminum beakers for the other 2. The chairs were brought closer to the stove. "Here's to a good result to the battle." Elchlet raised his glass. We drank with him. With a little jerk, we tipped the brandy down our throats. What a treat! "And if it does not go well, Elchlet, what then? And if the breach through the Italians can't be sealed? Must not the relief army be pulled back as quickly as possible if it is not to be surrounded? Would our defeat then not finally be sealed? You just can't leave the gloom alone today. What is it? Defeat means death or imprisonment, or to be exact, only death. Imprisonment is the same as death. According to the newspapers and the broadcast to the soldiers, you could be right. But I was so convinced, quite honestly, about the shot in the back of the neck that the Reds give to everyone, that living in captivity was never advisable. That could be, Adam. I will never go into captivity. According to your opinion, the whole army must be in a hopeless position if it no longer has the least prospect of a breakthrough, only the option to let oneself be shot down by the enemy. How does your thesis differ from the appeal for mass suicide? I too personally fear captivity, but can we take the responsibility for hundreds of thousands being victims of perhaps unfounded anxiety? That is senseless. In my opinion, the battle must go on as long as there is any possibility of relief. Otherwise, the question arises of the last vestiges of hope having vanished. My dear Adam, you can be assured that I would never agree to a breaking off of the fighting, when that would be tantamount to captivity, and imprisonment is death. How will you avoid captivity, Elchlet? I would ask Paulus to permit me to go to the front as a combatant. There I would sell my life as dearly as possible. That is nonsense, Elchlet. Nothing but suicide. You have your wife and your children. It is not dishonorable for a commander to end a battle that has demanded the useless expenditure of the lives of tens of thousands of men. I think that you should go over all of this once more. The ayah stood up. There is nothing for me to revise, but I hope that all will come out well. With these words, he said goodbye to me and my speechless lieutenant sitting there.